The Cisco Grove Incident. It was September 4, 1964, and 28-year-old Donald Shrum and a group of friends were bow and arrow hunting at Cisco Grove in Placer County, California. Amidst the excitement of the hunting, Shrum had somehow become separated from the rest of his party and decided to sleep in a tree for safety as nightfall approached. However, his peace wouldn't last long as he saw a white light that moved with a zigzagging motion through the trees at a low altitude. At first, Shrum thought that it was a helicopter, and so he jumped down from the tree and began lighting flares to attract attention to himself, under the assumption that his friends had launched a rescue party. Eventually, the light turned towards him and came to a stop about 50 yards away from the tree. As the object landed, he realized that it was clearly not a helicopter, and was instead something completely alien, pun intended, to him. The UFO was apparently cigar-shaped and around the size of a 14-story building, according to a description of the incident given by two ufologists on Coast to Coast AM. A smaller scout ship was expelled from the large craft, which landed nearby. Now frightened, Shrum clambered back up into the tree for safety, or to gain a better vantage point, depending on which account you look at. After a short period of time, three beings approached the tree. Two of them were humanoids, described as being a little over 5 feet tall with a silvery uniform that covered their heads. The description given on Coast to Coast AM also suggested that the entities wore something similar to welding goggles. The third approached slightly later in the encounter and resembled a classic sci-fi robot. It was darker in color and had two reddish-orange eyes. In place of a mouth, the robot had a slit-like opening that would drop open like the door of an oven. Shrum's shock soon turned to panic as the entities began to shake the tree, attempting to dislodge him from his perch. He vividly remembers that the robot-like entity would let its lower jaw drop, before reaching inside the rectangular gap thus revealed, and emitting a puff of smoke in Shrum's direction. This smoke would then spread like a mist and would make him lose consciousness when it reached him. When Shrum came back to consciousness again, the beings were still trying to get him out of the tree, and he felt nauseous. He attempted to scare the entities away by throwing bits of lit clothing and matches at them, which momentarily caused them to back away before continuing their assault. Somehow, he also observed that audio signals from the UFO seemed to be influencing the behavior of the occupants. Finally, in a finale to the first confrontation that is worthy of an action movie, Shrum managed to load and shoot an arrow at the invaders and hit the robot. This impact caused a spark to fly off the creature, indicating that it was indeed metallic. He shot two more arrows at the beings, each time causing them to scatter and back away from the tree. However, not even this daring retaliation would give the aliens cause to retreat, as they were soon joined by a second robot, which once again used white vapor coming from its mouth to render Shrum unconscious. When Shrum woke again, the two non-robot humanoids were climbing the tree. He managed to dislodge them by shaking the tree and throwing various objects at them. These bizarre attacks continued, on and off, for most of the night. As dawn approached, more humanoids arrived on the scene, and a large volume of the strange smoke made Shrum black out once more. When Shrum next woke, the aliens were finally gone, but he was only hanging from the tree by his belt. He was soon rescued and reunited with the hunters, one of whom, Vincent Alvarez, had also become lost during the night and seen the same UFO, corroborating part of his story. Unfortunately, Donald Shrum was the only one who saw the otherworldly invaders that night, a partial corroboratory account. So, what should we make of such a scenario? There are certainly other accounts on record that speak of robotic creatures accompanying more flesh and blood aliens. Most receive similar skepticism as this one. The fact that we ourselves use robotic machines for all manner of purposes, though, should halt such one-sided and predetermined skepticism in its tracks. There are also numerous accounts of witnesses being knocked unconscious by strange vapors. Perhaps one particular case that contains both of those elements would be the strange encounters of Spring-Heeled Jack from Victorian England, whose roots stretch into legend and folklore but which has always been of interest to UFO researchers. Furthermore, one of his two fellow hunters, Vincent Alvarez, at least in part, could corroborate the incident. From his position, he witnessed the strange glowing craft moving over the trees. It would then take off at a great pace into the sky. This would likely have been while Shrum was battling with the strange creatures. Incidentally, all three of the men would return to the destination later that day after hearing Shrum's story. They did find several of the arrows he had fired, as well as several pieces of charred clothing. However, the coins he had thrown at them had seemingly been scooped up by these menacing visitors before they left. His two friends would believe his claims, though, in part due to Alvarez's own sighting of the glowing craft leaving the scene. Elves or iron giants? This case wouldn't contain anything out of the ordinary, aside from the obvious, if it weren't for a bizarre corroboration of the story by a book written in 1836. It was called Le Livre des Légendes and was written by a French librarian by the name of Antoine Leroux de Lincy. The book has this to say about elves. If a mortal being dares come near them, they open their mouth and, struck by the breath which escapes from it, the imprudent fellow dies poisoned. This connection was pointed out by Jacques Vallée in his essential tome Passport to Magonia. Jacques also asserted that the bizarre effects felt by Shrum are consistent with the sudden deprivation of oxygen, a strange and intense military meeting. However, when Shrum's mother-in-law, upon hearing of the encounter, told an astronomer friend from the local college, things began to take a gritty turn. The astronomer would immediately contact the nearby McClellan Air Force Base. He would inform them of the account and the location of the witness. Even more bizarre, instead of visiting him at his home to listen to his version of events, even though he had not made a report, they would arrange to meet in an empty house at an off-base housing development. Shrum would agree to the meeting. The two officers present would listen to his account and then confiscate several of the arrows. Later claims suggested these had shavings of the robot on them. Then, though, they would insist that what he had just described to them hadn't happened. Or not in the way he remembered. Furthermore, they would present several alternative scenarios, as if giving him the opportunity to pick one for himself. He would eventually agree that he wasn't certain of what he had seen. If for no other reason than to keep his employers from facing similar questions. Shrum has stuck to the same story and version of events for over half a century. And surely a hoaxer would have made sure at least one of the other hunters witnessed the events in full. For authenticity if nothing else. Perhaps the fact that they didn't is proof enough of such authenticity.